And as I sowed into a church that was not perfect, because you'll never find a perfect church, the next day, $2,000 comes into my bank account. Hey, so welcome back. So in the last video, I was talking about mindset. I was talking about the power of prayer, that you really want to go into a place of prayer before you start your day, before you get to work, before you start your chores. You really want to find some quiet time with the Lord. But I alluded to something with the Garden of Eden with Adam and Eve. And I talked about how they took the 10%. I want to tell you a story because it's interesting that tree that they took, God gave them access to everything else. But he asked this one tree, I don't want you to touch it. And it really points to that 10%. I remember I had a guy, he was coming to my house. I owned my home at the time, and I think I needed something fixed. I don't remember what it was. But of course, he saw some things that I had out, and he asked if I was a Christian. And I told him yes. And immediately he started to tell me how angry he was at the church because all they want to do is take your money. And he started to go on and on and on. And as I'm listening to him, I really started to understand. He was saying that he was a Christian, but the only problem he's had is he wouldn't go to church because all they want is money. And I started to ask him some deeper questions because he's claiming to be a Christian. But as I asked him deeper questions, it was true that he wasn't giving Jesus everything. And even if he was giving Jesus everything else, he wasn't giving of his finances. And it really reminded me of the rich young ruler. I want to talk to you about a prosperity mindset versus a poverty mindset. If you're not willing to give the Lord of your finances and tithes and offerings, I want to tell you that you really have not given Jesus the authority over your finances to bless them. I tell you this, you can be blessed. You can have riches without the Lord's help. You can just work hard and you can think smart. But there's something different when the kingdom of heaven is backing exactly what you do. I have testimonies where I would sow, the Lord would just tell me to sow. He would tell me to just be generous, and I would sow $1,000. I remember one time I sowed $1,000. At that time, that was the biggest amount that I had ever sowed in my life. And it was so interesting because that was one of the last times that I went to the church that I sowed into, because they were doing some things that we found out weren't the best, and it wasn't the best fit for me. But even as I sowed into the point I'm making is, even as I sowed into a church that was not perfect, because you'll never find a perfect church, the next day, $2,000 comes into my bank account. $2,000 comes into my account from someone that I don't know. I never met the person. I think it was registered under a business, but I couldn't understand what the business did or how the business got my contact information. The truth was that this was provision from the Lord, because usually businesses, they take money, they don't give it. And so I want to tell you that when you sow and when you reap, you're not sowing to a man, you're sowing unto the Lord. And there are promises that the Lord lays out. A tithe is not what you expect to receive from. The tithe is really the bare minimum that the Lord asks for. Your offering is over and above. And so I encourage you, if you really want to walk in kingdom business, make sure you make your business one that you're allowing the Lord to bless your finances. And if you're holding back, if you have a poverty mindset where you don't want to give, you don't want to be generous, believe me, the Lord will not give to you as much as he wants to. Poverty mindset goes to every area of life, because there's so many times where we want more, we want to receive more, but we hoard up the things that we have. And in this, we stop the Lord's hand from blessing. Imagine it this way. Imagine you're holding so many things, but you're asking the Lord to give you more. There's only so much you can hold. But see, finances are also called currency. And there's a current with finances. You see, when you give, you receive. This is what the Bible says. When you pour out, you're poured into. And so as soon as you start to hold on to things, it stops the natural flow of finances coming. And so if you need a blessing from the Lord, it's something that I learned when I went into full-time ministry. I remember I needed to raise around $10,000 to go to this evangelism training that I was super excited to do. And it was really my door to walk in purpose. And what would happen is I would run out of money because I needed to quit my job in order to do this training. So I didn't have any income coming in, and I really stepped out in faith. But what started to happen and what I started to learn was when I would sow, when I would give, things would come into my bank account. I learned this so much that when I later graduated and I became a leader, there were so many students that were having problems with finances. They didn't understand how to raise finances, and they were going to be kicked out of program because they weren't able to pay their tuition. And I remember I was the first one that I went in the chat and I said, we need to start to use kingdom principles. And I gave a large amount to one individual and I encouraged others to do it. The testimony is that not only did finances come back into my pockets, but finances started to flow from student to student to student. These are kingdom principles, and this always goes back to mindset. Because if you have a fear that God is not going to provide, or if you have a fear of giving, the Lord tells you to give and you're afraid to do so, or if there's just a prompting in your heart where you're like, man, I need more, and you're afraid to give, this is the mindset that you need to fight against. It's not more work that you need to do, but you need to work on your mind. Because as your mind shifts, as your mind changes, you start to understand that God owns a cattle on 1,000 hills, and he's able to provide each and every one of your needs. So give, and it will be given back to you. Pressed down, shaken together, and running over.